that early stage, we were like, hang on, we had no idea what we were doing, but these people are still getting success. And so maybe there's something to it and we should spend more time doing it. So looking back at it now, we have supported over 900 people. For me, I think, as I mentioned, one of the major challenges was this issue of underemployment that I was personally facing after studying and doing a few degrees. And one of the challenges we've seen people face after they finish Catalyser or programs like us is, many entrepreneurs fall down because they don't have access to capital. And so if you can, the cost of launching a satellite or accessing space is a lot lower, but the accessibility hasn't been the same. And so how do we make sure that the benefits that space provides can actually be shared amongst everyone?
Welcome, Usman, to the Startup Journeys podcast.
Thank you very much for having me.
It's a great pleasure to have you on the podcast today. So let's get straight into it. To kick things off, we'd like to hear a little bit about your background and what challenges did you face along the way and how did you overcome them?
Yeah, so my background is a bit of a complex one, as I think many of us do in the startup world. We come from many different backgrounds. So for me, I'm originally from Pakistan. I came here to Australia about 10 years ago, 2013, 2014. Initially as an engineer from Pakistan, so had a mechanical engineering background, then studied here, did a master's in engineering management from Wollongong Uni, and then after studying, I decided to stay here in Australia. Now, like many other people who are migrants who come to this country, I was kind of looking forward to the opportunities that Australia provides. But quite quickly realized that this was something that was quite hard, to be able to get into work here. So I was doing a lot of casual work, so 7-Eleven, BP, the kind of casual jobs that many other migrants and refugees are doing. And for me, that was something that I didn't want to do long term. So I decided that I would, apply for loads of jobs. Wasn't really getting anywhere, so I decided that I'll start my own business. Initially, went on this journey of trying to start a few different types of startups. None of them really worked. Had an initial idea in the clean tech industry because of my engineering background. That didn't work, but went into a social enterprise education program run by a school for social entrepreneurs. This was back in 2015, and just learned about how startups work, what is a social enterprise, and how you can actually solve a problem using, startup methodology. And so for me, this was this problem of unemployment, but particularly underemployment that many immigrants and refugees in Australia face, and decided that I wanted to do something about it. So for me, I was trying to start a business and was struggling and finding it hard. And I was thinking, hang on, there are other people like me who are in this situation. So it'd be great if we could, all work together. So that was the kind of, genesis of Catalyser, where we started with the pilot program back in Parramatta in 2016. It was just, kind of cobbling together a program. I had absolutely no idea what we were doing. I had a co-founder who I was working with at the time to be able to work out how we can support other migrants, refugees to start their own business. So we ran a 2 months program to begin with as our pilot in 2016, and then through that pilot, essentially, the first 10 people that we took through, 3 of them started their own business. That gave me and my co-founder a lot of confidence that what we're doing, there's something in it.
That's a pretty good rate, actually, in the startup world, 3 out of 10. It's usually 1 out of 19, I think.
Absolutely right. And that's the thing where it's like, even at that early stage, we were like, hang on, we had no idea what we were doing, but these people are still getting success. And so maybe there's something to it and we should spend more time doing it. So looking back at it now, we have supported over 900 people in the last 7 years.
Wow, that's fantastic.
It's been absolutely incredible journey to be able to work on Catalyser and support people. But I can't really, as I said, take credit for my own. There's so many people that have been involved in the journey who've helped us along the way. So yes, that's been kind of my story, but there's been just so much more that's happened along the way. Very happy to chat about any of that stuff.
Yeah, it is really all about community, isn't it? It's not until I moved into the Macquarie Uni incubator there and, started talking with other founders, and they had programs there that really helped me a lot. I mean, I also had no idea what I was doing at the beginning. Some people say I still don't, but even your motivation is similar to mine. It's like helping those people that were there as well, like don't know what they're doing and need that help and need to hear other people's stories. So, yeah, I really commend the work that you're doing. And um, I look, startup life is so difficult as it is, but how much more difficult is it for a migrant or refugee? I can imagine it would be significantly different. And tell us a bit more also about how you felt coming here and having all those aspirations and degrees, and then working at 7-Eleven. And because unfortunately, it's a really common story.
Yeah, so I mean, as you mentioned, startup life is quite hard, and starting a business generally is hard. But yeah, when you're a migrant or refugee, it just becomes doubly, triply hard. And the key reason is that fundamentally, if you want to start a business, the thing that you're really relying on are networks. So you want to get your first customers. You need networks. You want to know people, who can kind of introduce you to others, so you can get access to your target market in the early days, people who can believe in you, in terms of investors and sort of friends and family. You need to have people that you can hire to work with you for free. So all those kind of very, very early people that you need access to. A lot of that comes from networks, a community. Unfortunately, when you're a migrant to a new country, you don't know people, right? So, and particularly in a professional context, you don't know anyone. So that's something that's really, really hard. And those kind of same barriers that exist for, if you want to get a job here in Australia as well, and not just Australia, anywhere in the world, really, right? Whenever you move to a different country, it's just hard. So that's one of the biggest barriers, being access to a network. Then obviously for some people, more than others, there's language, which can be a barrier. There's issues with kind of understanding the culture, how business is done here, how to access information, what to trust, what not to trust. Because in some countries, if you want to just start a business, like I can talk about Pakistan, you just start a business, you literally build a product, start selling it, and then you start working out, okay, what do we need to do on top of that? In Australia, there's like lots of regulations they need to be really aware of, because you don't want to mess up, and so it can be really scary for people. So I guess the challenges can really be significant. For me personally, and to your question around that aspirations and dreams, look, from a very young age, I really wanted to be doing something in like kind of supporting people and helping people. So my parents are both doctors. They wanted me to become a doctor. I didn't end up becoming a doctor, but I feel like that kind of idea of wanting to provide service or support people was something that was kind of instilled in me from a very young age. And just coming here to Australia and kind of studying here, I wanted to do something in that space, but I didn't really have an exact idea of what, which is why, as I mentioned, that I wanted to go into clean tech, because, for all the kind of work that we could do in sort of solving climate change. But I guess, as I got into social enterprise, I realized this is a huge space and sector that I could get involved in. And so, working in 7-Eleven, working in BP wasn't fun. But I think when I kind of reflect back on it, I think it was a necessary part for me to be able to get integrated to Australian culture. So, speaking to lots of people, you get to understand how people think. When you're working in a service station, you get to meet kind of different types of people all day, every day. But then also, I think this is just one of those things where if I got a good, decent job in the beginning, I probably wouldn't have the same kind of motivation to wanting to start a startup or wanting to go on this journey of social enterprise, just because. Why would you take the hard path if you've got something that's easier and you've got a decent job? And so for me, I think it was more of a necessity in the beginning. Now I think it's more of a choice, because I can see the impact that we're able to create, and that's something that kind of keeps me going, and some kind of reason.
And I think a lot of people that are in the space that are trying to do something good in the social enterprise sort of space, there's something in their life that they've gone through that's motivated them to be like that, and I think, people might think, working at 7-Eleven or whatever, those sort of jobs, you can learn a lot. I mean, I drove taxis for 10 years in the 90s, and I'll tell you what, it's not an easy job. You have to be, like a psychologist or a counselor with a whole lot of people, dealing with different people in different ways, sometimes in like difficult or even dangerous situations. and also at the same time thinking like a big map in your head. Oh, if I go here at this time, where are we going to get a fare, and you're trying to make some money. People underestimate this sort of stuff, and you learn really good skills actually, and then it can motivate you to do other things as well in your life. So no, I totally agree with that. Now, in this podcast, we talk a lot about. We don't talk a lot about success stories. It's great to hear them, but only 1 in 19 succeed. And what you're doing with Catalyser is fantastic, because that really accelerates the success rate, I guess, of that. But the whole thing around success, what is success? A lot of people, you may have a startup, like people always think about unicorns. You make the $1 billion, and then, okay, so you've made the $1 billion, you become a unicorn, but how do you feel about that? And so I think for me, that's why I'm really interested in the social enterprise space, because if you're doing something good, then there's a different feeling around it, rather than just trying to become a unicorn as such. That's why I'm really interested in your story as well. And so tell us about maybe in the startup world or somewhere in your life where you've come up against a huge problem, and how you felt at that time, how it affected you, and how you overcame it.
Yeah, so I mean, I agree with you on the kind of comment that you made about success as well, where it's, like there's different ways of measuring success, and obviously, kind of could be from a dollar perspective, as you mentioned, or from an impact perspective. For me, I think, as I mentioned, one of the major challenges was this issue of underemployment that I was personally facing after studying and doing a few degrees here in Australia. But then also not just that, I think even running Catalyser, as a social enterprise, and this was, we got started back in 2016, found it quite challenging to get it up and going, and particularly get the funding for it, because there's no kind of legal model or structure for a social enterprise here in Australia. So you would have on the one end, like the kind of for-profit PTY structures, and the other hand, not-for-profit structures. So we initially set up as a for-profit, quite quickly realizing, hang on, that might not work because we might rely on a lot of grants. So then moved over to a not-for-profit structure, and then kind of seeking grants and going through that whole process, as can be quite challenging.
Yes.
So there've been times in our journey where we were basically like, we have no money, we have no grants. What do we do now? And I think at that point, you've got the choice to make, and many kind of founders face this issue, right? Where cash flow can become a real challenge. We had the same situation during COVID, where it was, I guess, less cash flow, more kind of because all of our programs and stuff that we were doing was in person, in kind of Sydney and Melbourne. Everything, like with lockdown, everything kind of went up in the air. So we had to kind of really quickly change and adapt, and then move everything online. And which I guess it wasn't just us. There's many organizations did it globally, but I think it's for me, like we've faced many challenges, both for me personally, but also to Catalyser. But it's always been kind of having the attitude that every challenge presents an opportunity, and you can kind of think about it from two sides of the coin, and really looking at okay, well, this is a challenge that I'm facing right now. Well, what can I do about it? And as an engineer, I try to kind of solve problems. So that's the kind of mindset that I go at it with. And obviously, you can't solve every problem, but issues such as cash flow, issues such as kind of like working out a new business model, or things like that, I think is always, if you're persistent, if you're creative, if you've got the right people and community around you, especially mentors, that can make a huge difference. So for me, having the right kind of mentors made a huge difference. And I went through many different programs myself, just to be able to educate myself, to learn about the startup world, to connect with different people, because I was facing the same issues of not having access to a network that the people that I'm trying to work with or support do. And so it was like, kind of trying to build a ship as you're flying it. And so really, I guess, those are some of the challenges that we faced, but also like some of the ways we've kind of tackled it.
Yeah, and who were some of those mentors that really helped you in those early stages?
Oh, look, there's just so many amazing mentors. It's hard to kind of name names because there's just too many. But what I would say, like, one of those is my co-founder, Jake Muller, who, I started Catalyser with. So he he was an accountant, or is an accountant actually, and he was quite disillusioned by kind of the world of big accounting. So
Mm-hmm.
he did his degree here in Australia, and then kind of worked for one of the big four firms. Decided he didn't really like it, so actually did the other thing. So he went over to Bangladesh to work with Muhammad Yunus and Grameen, understand about microfinance and things like that. And he was back from that journey back to Australia, and then we kind
Mm-hmm.
of worked together to set up Catalyser. So because of his kind of financial background, I learned a lot from him around finances and how to kind of manage a business. And then Alan, who I know you've met as well, Alan Jones,
Yeah.
who's an incredible mentor and supporter of Catalyser and for me personally. And so that's another one that, like he's helped us a lot and helped me personally a lot into kind of thinking about, how do you not just start a startup, but how do you help people? How do you support people? How do you build a curriculum? We've had many amazing entrepreneurs and residents that have come in over the years, and just like there's a very long list of mentors and people that have supported
Yeah.
us. It's hard to kind of
Yeah.
mention one or the other, but I think like if I have to think of like top one or
Mm-hmm.
two, that would be
Okay.
Jack and Alan, who really supported us for the last
You
7
know,
8 years.
you know,
Yeah.
on some of the other podcasts, there's been a bit of a discussion around. I think it was Ben Jeffries from ATEC Global was saying that for him, and he's run an incubator, I think, and he's saying that all the programs are wonderful, and it's all helpful, and you need that education. But he said the best thing is actually just to get in a room with a whole bunch of other founders, and I agree with that too. Like even now, I go back to the incubator and meet up with a couple of the guys, founders that are still in the space, and I found, and I've also interviewed another lady called Liz Swagart, and she was what was that word she was saying? Something like there's some, I forget the word now, but like mentor whiplash or something like that. Look, there's great mentors out there, and I know Alan was fantastic. I had him on my podcast as well, and I think you've got to choose the right ones. But when you first begin, if you have a lot of mentors, one will say one thing, one will say the other. It can get quite confusing. I mean, did you find that as well, or how did you like get to the ones that you realized? Was it something like this one feels right for me, or it just made sense to you? I mean, how did you come up with or did you have a lot of mentors and get a bit confused like me, or that wasn't your journey?
Yeah, I think that's something that like both I've faced, but I've seen other kind of founders face, particularly in the early days when you're kind of setting up your first
Mm-hmm.
organization, and you're just getting started. That there are a lot of people that will give you advice, or will give you kind of suggestions, and I think initially, I had no idea of how to actually go about it or filter it, and know what advice to follow, what works, what doesn't work. I
Yeah.
think there's a few things in there. One is that over time that I've learned. How to filter advice based on someone's background. So if someone's say got a financial background and giving me advice on finances,
Mm.
or a legal background, or whatever, some specific
Yeah.
kind of technical background, it's better to kind of learn from them, versus someone who's just like for example a marketer but then talking about finance and might not have anything to do with it,
Yeah.
and their opinion is as good as mine sometimes. And so
Yeah.
I think it's important to kind of know where they're coming from. Second thing is, like if someone's giving you advice or guidance, I think it's also knowing whether what they're telling you is from their own experience or some facts, or whether that's like an opinion that they hold of a view of the world, or a map of the world. And I think it's really important to distinguish. And in the early days, when you're just starting a startup, it's a big power dynamic that you're a founder. This other mentor is giving you so much time, and is like this amazing person, and so it's really hard for you to kind of actually challenge them. But I think over time you kind of learn to do that as well, and have this really healthy debate and discussion and understand where they're coming from and why, so that you can kind of understand what is the kind of I guess underlying logic or the reason behind the feedback or the kind of I guess advice that they're giving you or support they're providing you,
Yeah.
and then you can decide what to kind of pick and choose and apply, right? Because at the end of the day, it's your startup, it's your company, you're the one who have to live with the consequences, but also you're the one that's closest to the business, and so you
Mm.
understand lots of different kind of I guess factors that are affecting the organization. And so to be able to I guess get advice is really important, but then what to act on and in what way, I think that's a muscle that it's kind of like exercising it and building it over time. It's hard, I don't think it's easy, and I really like the mentor whiplash,
Yeah.
because in the early days I definitely felt that, like, too many
Yeah.
different opinions, too many different ideas, quite hard to know how to navigate them. But I think over time, I've kind of developed a mental model, or at least a matrix in my head of, this person is really good at this. So if I need advice on this topic, I'll go to
Yeah.
this person, I'll go to that person, because I know they might have had some similar experiences, and then kind of try to extract or get that information.
Yeah.
But also knowing that, like, mentoring is not a one-way street. So oftentimes you might think that you are, like, kind of getting help from a mentor, but you're also providing support to a mentor as well, because many people who do provide mentoring are doing it because they want to feel good about themselves. They want to kind of support others,
Yeah.
and so it's one of those things where, like, if you think about, you're also kind of, supporting them achieve an objective. It kind of reduces slightly that power imbalance, and makes you a bit more confident when you kind of try and question and debate on some of these topics. But yeah, it's hard. It's not easy. But I feel like over time you can develop it as a muscle.
Yeah, and I think that's really good advice actually for early stage startup founders. Yeah, because it is always a bit of a difficult place to be. But there are some really great mentors out there, as you said, and there's been probably with me 3, 4, or 5 that have really been great for me as well. Now, you have a small title being named 2018 Commonwealth Young Person of the Year from a small group of 1.4 billion young people. How did this amazing title come about, and how did it influence your work and your journey?
Yeah, I know it's one of those things where, like, some of these things are very serendipitous and not anything you can plan for. So
Mhm.
I was a part of another program run by this amazing organization called FYA, the Foundation for Young Australians, and they took, at the time, this is back in 2016, 60 people who they called young social pioneers, that they would help them, support them with their programming, get them started in their social enterprise journey. So I was part of their program, and through that. They basically nominated me as one of the people, on this list, where, I guess many different organizations nominate people around the world. I had no idea what it meant at the beginning, and then I just basically got into the finals. I also didn't know that I actually won that award until, like, we got flown to the UK, and was kind of standing on stage, and I was like, hang on, did I really get that award? Because that was a huge deal. But I think for me personally, it was a validation of what we're trying to do,
Mhm.
and how, like, this problem that we're trying to solve is not just an Australian problem; it's a global problem of
Yeah.
supporting refugees and migrants into getting to work and into employment and business. But then, secondly, it was also, I guess, something that I utilized really to then get open some doors for me personally, and obviously for
Mm.
Catalyser. So I think
Yeah.
it had a huge impact in that way. That, for example, some of the funders that we were speaking to, who were supporting us in the beginning, but then, we're a bit skeptical of whether what we're doing was going to work. you know when they saw that we're getting some recognition, kind of, became a lot more,
Mm.
I guess confident about supporting us,
Yeah.
or some of the kind of other people, that wanted to cover us as well. So I think it's one of those things where, it took us, and for me personally, to get that award overseas, to then get more recognition here in Australia as well for the work we're doing.
Yeah.
So that was really great, and really opened up a bunch of doors. Yeah, but I still think it was like one of those lucky things where, like, you just have to be the right person at the right time, kind
Mhm.
of thing. And I again, like, I know there's, like, so many amazing deserving people around the world who probably would have gotten it, in this year and that year, and that's an annual thing. So every year they give it to someone new. So yes, I still don't believe it that I got that. I know, and it's kind of like, when you look at it from the outside, you might see someone getting an award or something, and you might be like, okay, they got it, and that's great. But when you're the person living it, it's a very surreal moment, a very surreal feeling. And yeah, I definitely don't think that I did anything special to deserve it. But I felt like that was a really good validation for the work we're doing, and really
Yeah.
helped us kind of have the impact that we've had so
Mhm.
far, because of that push, that really, it was like a rocket booster that helped us kind of get in that journey.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's say if I was a migrant or refugee at the moment, and I wanted to have my own business, I'm struggling. I've started something, but like you said, I haven't got the network, haven't got the funding. What advice would you give them?
Yeah, so I mean, it depends on what kind of business you're trying to start, but
Mm-hmm.
um, for for someone who, for example, wants to start it, is new to Australia, wants to start their own business, obviously you can come to Catalyser. We run different types of programs, and we can help you kind of both learn about how to start a startup, but then also practically implement it through our accelerator program. But then also just, I guess, if you don't have a network, build one. I think is one of the things that I've learned is that there's still lots of opportunities that exist, and there are ways in which you can kind of access them. And people generally in the startup ecosystem are quite friendly, and quite open to connecting with new people. There are, you can get a startup job. You can, do some fellowships, for example, that I know StartMed has and other organizations have as well. You can get involved by going to different networking events and kind of drinks and things
Yeah.
like that. You can go to conferences as well. So for example, Sunrise, it's a big one that we know that Blackbird does. So there's all these kind of things that already exist that are out there in the ecosystem. For me, I know that I've told many people to go to Fishburners pitch night that is kind of every Friday in Sydney. If you're in
Okay.
Sydney, if you're in Melbourne, you can be part of Startup Network. So there's
Yeah.
just a lot of stuff that's out there. I think it's just, I mean, depending on where you are, kind of looking at where are those local communities that you can be a part of.
Yeah.
Um, and joining meetups, joining events, and things like that is a really good way.
Mm-hmm.
And one of my mentors actually gave me this really great advice in the very early days of our business was, if you want to learn about something new or if you want to get involved, you can either learn about it from a book or from an individual or a person. And
Yeah.
so many of this stuff can't be learned from a book, which is kind of, actually getting a network. So you just
True.
need to speak to people. So getting out there, making a bit of an effort, is the right way to go, and finding what's available. And then if everything else fails, just reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm very happy to help and support anyone who's new to the country.
Okay, and we'll leave all those details in the show notes, plus Catalyser as well. So if they wanted to apply to Catalyser, what sort of entry is there? What do they need to do? What stage they need to be at for that?
Yeah, so we have two sets of programs that we run. We've got a fellowship program and an accelerate program. So for fellowship, it is really early stage. So it's an idea stage. Basically, you can have an
Mm-hmm.
idea of what you want to do, or you just even want to just learn about how to start a business. So you can go to our website. It's Catalyser,
Yep.
catalyser.com.au. Check out the fellowship, apply. We do 2 to 3 cohorts every year. Take about 40 to 50 people per cohort. So that's an opportunity for you to get involved. It's a kind of 8-week program where you'll learn about how to start a business, lean startup methodology, marketing, finance, legal, all the fun stuff. But then I think the biggest thing is really the community, where you get to meet other alumni, you get to meet with different mentors, you get to meet with other founders, and really kind of discuss your ideas and figure out how you can kind of progress, and actually achieve some of those goals. And you don't know what will come out of some of those conversations and those kind of, I guess, meetings. And then for those who already have an MVP or a prototype and now are looking to kind of actually get out of the market, start selling, build a team, grow their business, that's where Accelerate program comes in. So Accelerate is a bit further along in the journey. And that's where they can apply there. Our Accelerate program normally is at kind of like the end of the year. So the fellowships are first kind of, I guess, 6 to 8 months of the year, and then about September onwards is when we do our Accelerate program. So we just finished off one of the ones from last year, and you can also go and see some pitch videos online just to be able to see what kind of startups that we've been working with. But it's a very diverse kind of community. So we've had people from 87 different countries. 46% of them have been women entrepreneurs. So doesn't matter what your background is, or from like a country, or what idea you're working on, you're very welcome at Catalyser. And if we can't help you, you should still apply, because we can also tell you where to go. So we also provide, I guess, that navigation support of, this is what the startup ecosystem looks like. These are all the organizations that are out there. These are all the VC funds, etc. And so you should go speak to this person and go do this. So I think at the very least, you'll be able to kind of get to know what that roadmap for you might look like.
Well, that's amazing. That's everything that you really need at the beginning. And I think that fellowship program is a really exciting program, because a lot of, the idea stage is still important. And even, to develop your idea further, or even to, see if that idea is actually viable or not. And even to understand, what it is to run a startup, and what you need to go through. Some people might say, well, you know what, actually it's a bit more than I thought, or others will say, yeah, no, I can do this journey, and you can get validation on your idea as well. I think there needs to be more support in that area, not just always looking for those unicorns, you know. Unfortunately, that's quite a bit of the mindset in the space at the moment. So I think that's brilliant work that you're doing, and anybody out there that's a migrant or refugee with an idea, go to Catalyser, and either, you know, you might be part of the fellowship or accelerator, or you guys, you can guide them where to go. I think that's brilliant. There's so much needed in the space, so I really commend you on the work that you're doing. You're listening to Startup Journeys, Founders Unplugged with Paul King. Okay, so now to change topic a bit. You attended the International Space University, which I never knew there was one, and are head of growth in Space Base, New Zealand. So how did you first become interested and involved in space, and what is Space Base's mission?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'd say for me, so I mean, I've always been very curious, and as I mentioned, I'm an engineer by training, so I wanted to do something more technical, something that's, I guess, that's kind of using my brain in that sort of technical way. And with Catalyser, obviously, setting up a social enterprise was great, but then that was kind of the starting point. And it's funny when you kind of introduce yourself as, look, I'm someone who's looking for a job. You get a very different response from, I'm someone who's already running an organization, and now, how can I support or add value to your organization? And that change in mindset, and then also changing experience, helps you kind of have more opportunities. So for me, I found that as well. I actually went to another program prior to this, which is run by an organization called Singularity University in the US. So I got selected on a scholarship to go to the US and actually live at the NASA Ames Research Park in California for 3 months, and just learn about, and again, the kind of premise was, there's 90 people from around the world that they'll select. It was funded by Google at the time, to look at understanding how you can use exponential technologies like AI and 3D printing and so on, to really try and figure out how you can solve problems such as climate change. So the focus was still social and environmental, but using, I guess, technology. And so there's some really interesting people that are a part of that cohort and there I met a couple of mentors and people who were really doing a lot of work in the space sector. Obviously, it was based at NASA, so that kind of helped. Space was actually just getting set up at the time. So the two founders, Eric Dahlstrom and Emmeline Dahlstrom, were both in the US, and they were working with the US space industry, and they're working kind of different organizations. Eric was actually involved in the design of the International Space Station. But what they said was that, and which I personally deeply resonated with, was the space-based mission of, look, within the space industry, the costs have come down considerably in the last 20, 30 years. So, the cost of launching a satellite or accessing space is a lot lower, but the accessibility hasn't been the same. And so how do we make sure that the benefits that space provides can actually be shared amongst everyone? And so it's really about that idea of how do we democratize that access. It's kind of similar to what I'm doing in the sort of Catalyser world, or supporting migrants, refugees get access to the startup ecosystem. It was kind of this idea that many other countries and people don't have access to space. And so how do we provide that access? So they actually moved from the US to New Zealand to set up that organization as a kind of like a prototype or a pilot in New Zealand, and see if they can do something in New Zealand, and then based off of that, then grow it globally as this kind of organization. And so they've been doing that for the last 5 years quite successfully, where they run competitions, run different challenges, and where I've been involved is helping them figure out how they can grow that internationally, but then also help them with particularly something that I'm really proud of, is a competition that they run, which is called Space for Planet Earth. So it is utilizing satellite data and space technologies to try and understand climate change and how you can monitor climate change, how you can solve it. So every year there's, like, for example, the last year there was a focus on understanding, the marine degradation and kind of coastal reefs. This year there's a focus on methane emissions. And then they, different teams from unis, from schools, from startups to participate, and then they can get a prize. But not just prize, but also an incubator to help them build their idea and get funded and so on, right? So there's a lot of similarities in terms of like what Catalyser is versus what Spacebase is doing, but just in a different sector. So I don't have the functional expertise to do the space thing, but we're definitely working with them to be able to help them with the kind of entrepreneurship side of things. And with Space Base, what I guess is a really fantastic thing is that when they run that competition last year, the winning team was actually from Fiji, which tells you that initially they didn't really have those kind of opportunities, but by able to get that opportunity of kind of trying to do something in space, they were really able to kind of come up with a solution of how they can understand climate change and really monitor and come up with solutions locally within Fiji. So that was really, really exciting.
Yeah, because I mean, the Pacific Islands some of them are under threat of going underwater with climate change, and obviously it's a huge issue right now all around the world, and so it's great to see you working on it from that perspective, from space perspective, which is brilliant, really, really exciting and amazing work by the sound of it. Amongst the many things that you do and the many awards that you have as well. We only talked about one. I mean, you're also involved with the Obama Foundation. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that, how that came about and what you're doing with that?
Yeah, so again, as I said, a lot of this is serendipitous, and you don't know how some of these things happen. For me, or how we got started initially with Catalyser, actually out through City of Parramatta in Western Sydney, and one of the people from City of Parramatta actually went to, I think, a conference where they met with President Obama's sister. Her name is Maya. She's lovely. She also does some work in climate change, and she was like talking about this program that the Obama Foundation, what was set up by President Obama, was doing, which was to, I guess, get global leaders together to solve different global problems like climate change, like democracy, and so on. And so one of the things was that he asked me to apply for that. So I applied and I got lucky and I got accepted. So it was back in 2019 where I was selected one of the 200 leaders from Asia Pacific. We actually went to Kuala Lumpur, got a bit of a training on how to kind of get involved and learn from each other. But they've got this program for Europe, for the Americas and kind of Africa and so on as well. And so initially I was just about learning and kind of connecting with each other. Over the last year, I've been involved with them as a facilitator and kind of leader for the community of practice, where I'm helping put together essentially many social entrepreneurs that are across the Obama Foundation ecosystem globally, and kind of working with them and helping them figure out how they can have a bigger impact by collaboration with each other. So, oftentimes, what I'm doing in Australia, someone might be doing in the UK or other countries. So how do we kind of learn from each other? How do we work with each other? How do we share those learnings and collaborate? And so those are some of the things that I've been working on with them. It's something that it's a volunteer, I guess, opportunity, but something that I'm really, really, I guess, deeply appreciative of, because, oftentimes when you're working in Australia, you're kind of cut off from the kind of global scene because of, like we tend to kind of look inwards. But I feel like with issues that we're working on, like climate change or migration, like we can share our learnings, but also learn from each other globally. And so to be able to have those opportunities is really fantastic.
That's it's an amazing project. Now, the startup space, as we've said, is really, really difficult. It can even be more difficult for migrants and refugees, particularly. And it can really take a toll on our mental health. So what are some strategies that you may have used to maintain your mental health in difficult times, and any other stories of people who've gone through your Catalyser that have gone through issues, and if they've come out of that as well? What strategies or what have they done to get through that?
Yeah, I think this is such an important question because, absolutely, mental health is one of those things that doesn't get talked about often in the kind of startup world. But I think we definitely need to do a lot more focus on this because, as you know, startups are quite hard. There's a lot of uncertainty, both in terms of income, in terms of kind of where you're going, what's happening, and so that can really take a toll on you, and obviously the physical health as well as mental health. I guess for me personally, I have had kind of ups and downs in terms of mental health. So when and as well as physical health. So when I began my journey at Catalyser, I was of this kind of mindset of, like the hustle mindset, which is kind of this online. If you just watch YouTube Shorts, not a great place to kind of learn about how to start a startup. But basically, this kind of idea: I'm going to work 7 days a week, and so on, and I'll work harder than everyone else. That was a really bad idea
Yes.
because that like I just basically got burnt out in a couple of
Yeah.
years. That wasn't great.
Yeah.
And then I kind of took a step back and was like, hang on, I need to do something. And again, I had a great mentor who helped me understand, look, you can be effective and productive. You don't have to work kind of 7 days a week. You're going to also take care of yourself, your family, friends, so on. So I think even just carving out time, for me personally, is something that really helps in kind of just making sure that it's a bit more balanced. So I make sure that I take the weekend off now, which I know it sounds surprising to some people because they're like, of course you take the weekend off, but in a kind of startup world, that's not like a given that you will take time off. Also take some holidays, which is important. But then beyond that, I think it's one of those things, just like exercise, it's a muscle that you build. It's something that you can either deal with it reactively or proactively.
Yeah.
And in the past, I was quite reactive with it. But then, and I think this is something that not just with me, but many other migrants face this, where mental health can be this kind of taboo issue that doesn't get talked about. No one kind of wants to touch it because they're like, oh, like there's something wrong with you. You don't talk about it, whatever. But actually, I feel like it's really important to kind of talk about it and kind of talk about it positively and what we can do and kind of strategies and coping mechanisms. And particularly for me, one of the other organizations that supported us is Westpac Foundation, and they have had a fantastic EAP system. So I've kind of utilized that personally and really gotten out there and asked for that proactive support to be able to work through, what I'm going through, how to kind of plan my time and not to kind of burn out and not to kind of face those mental health issues. The other, I guess, good thing that has happened, and I've seen the Catalyser community, is we've had people who've kind of, because of that community, who face these complex issues, sometimes mental health, sometimes domestic violence, these kind of different things that I've been working on, I guess, in the community, that, they've been able to kind of support each other to solve those issues. But then also where some people have come to us or we've seen them kind of dealing with mental health issues, we've also referred them on to the right people. So I think part of this is, from an outside perspective, you can see someone running an incubator, but internally, we look at ourselves as a triage nurse, right? So if you want to learn about how to go and set up a startup, how to get access to VC funding or impact investment or whatever, similarly, how do you get access and support for mental health, how do you get access and support for, whatever it is, because we're kind of dealing with that as founders ourselves. So we want to kind of share that with other people too. And actually, one of our alumni has set up an amazing organization just in the last couple of years called Mead Psychology, which is actually a mental health kind of organization specifically for people of color from South Asian backgrounds. So she's from South Asian background herself, and actually has a mental health kind of experience and background. So she's worked in that sector, and she set up that organization as a psychologist and is helping others too. And so there's those kind of organizations that are, I guess, popping up now as well, which are fit for purpose, so people not just only understand the kind of mental health challenges that you face, but also how you can kind of address them in a culturally sensitive way. Because again, it's complicated when you kind of deal with different communities, different cultures, how they approach mental health, and then how they want to solve it.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll leave that those links in the show notes. That's really good advice, and it's really important. There is that mentality out there with some startup or incubators where, you got to work 24/7, 7 days a week, and it just can't last. You'll just burn out, and your mental health, your physical health, that's something that's really important, more than making some money. And it might take a little bit longer. In fact, it may not take a little bit longer because you'll be able to, if you're rested well, you're able to think better, make better decisions, and that'll probably save you so much more time than if you're all working like 14 hours a day, 7 days a week. It just doesn't work. But not long term anyway. Like you said, when that happens, you get burnt out. That's great. That's great advice. All right. Well, look, what is a question that you wish people ask you, but nobody has?
This is a tough one, but I would say probably around the future. So like
Mm-hmm.
where do I see the future and what's been happening in kind of different sectors and things that I've been involved
Mm-hmm.
in. So things like, I mean, I mentioned climate change or migration.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think like what's happening in the future, what are our plans for the future? I think that's some of the areas that I would love to talk about as well.
Okay. So I'm asking that question now.
Fair enough. Look, I think from a Catalyser perspective, we are something that we know that I mean migration is only increasing, not just because of kind of skills shortage and these kind of short term things, but also on the long term scale. When you look at climate change as an example, or you look at what's been happening globally in terms of just unrest and war, unfortunately, that will lead to more migration. There's a lot of economic migration after COVID as well. And so I feel like we have a role to play in kind of sharing the narrative that, migrants, refugees aren't just coming in and kind of just taking benefits from a particular country like Australia, but actually are contributing to the economy
Yeah.
and society. So both solving social challenges, but also adding to the economy, creating jobs. And the best way to do that is kind of showcasing the stories of amazing migrant refugee entrepreneurs. So part of our work will be doing that over the next sort of few months and years. The other thing we'll also be looking at is how can we support migrants, refugees, kind of understand more of their problems in their own communities and trying to solve them as well, just as we kind of going towards 2030 and try to meet some of the sustainable development goals. And so that's something that I'm really excited about. And then the third one is really looking at growing and scaling up as an organization internationally and trying to, I guess, be able to kind of share this knowledge and have impact internationally. And then finally, something that I've done is in the last year or two, working with another fantastic migrant entrepreneur himself, who's also an investor, to set up a new early stage fund called Backbone Partners that will be investing in migrant entrepreneurs in Australia who are early stage, who might not have their kind of first believer or their first funder, to help them get access to funding. So then, they can get started and then, develop their idea and sort of grow further. Because
Yeah.
one of the challenges we've seen people face after they finish Catalyser or programs like us is, many entrepreneurs fall down because they don't have access to capital. And so if you can provide that early capital, that can go a long way at that
So
pre-seed seed
important, so
stage.
important. That's a huge issue, and particularly like in the impact or social enterprise space, there's a huge gap, and I've talked with quite a few other guests about that as well. Now, this other project that you're doing and everything else that you're doing, and you were saying before that you do have weekends off. So I guess you must really manage your time really well. Like, what are some tips there? Because you're doing so much, you're involved in so much, and you're still having some time off. It sounds like you're still maintaining your mental health. You still got time to come onto my podcast, which I really appreciate. So, any tips? So, like, how do you manage that?
Yeah, I think one thing I'd say is don't try and do everything all at once. That's a recipe for disaster. So
Yeah.
I like a lot of these projects might seem that they're concurrent, but they're not. So Catalyzer obviously started about 7 8 years ago now, and we've set up as a team. Like there's a process and organization behind it. So I say that I'm doing it, but it's not me. It's many other people.
Yeah.
And so it's set up. It's a process. It's everything's already there. And so,
Mhm.
like it doesn't take as much of my time as it did, in the first, few years of the organization.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's what I was doing at that time. Since then, with some of the other projects that I've been involved in, many of them are not kind of full-time commitments. So this is like something that I'm doing like half a day a week or a day a week type thing.
Okay.
But it's I think, like I know where what are the areas where I'm actually kind of like Catalyzer still being the main thing, spending most of my time. So again, it's the 80-20
Mhm.
rule. So 80% of my time, so 3 to 4 days a week is spent on Catalyzer and probably one day a week on other activities. And that's where I guess the difference is when I'll spend more time on advisory or spend more time on helping other organizations out and things out. But I think really just time boxing that is a good idea, because otherwise, yeah, like you can get carried away quite quickly.
Yeah.
And particularly as an entrepreneur and a social entrepreneur, this is something that I've seen and I've faced this myself, which is there's a lot of things you can do, particularly volunteer doing, and it can suck a lot of your time.
Yeah.
So I think you've got to be really, really mindful of how you're spending your time. Again, it's one of those things where it just comes with practice. For me, in the beginning, I used to just time box specific activities. That didn't work as well as kind of specifically, I guess, deciding which days I'm doing what. And so now I've got, like 1 or 2 or 3 days a week when I'm doing just Catalyser work, and that's what it is. And then I'll have like a dedicated day for other stuff as well. So it's kind of working out what works best for you, I guess. But for me, it's always about, finding that balance, still spending time with friends and family, kind of doing more kind of, I guess, hobbies and fun stuff. Like I play a lot of video games. I play cricket. I watch a lot of cricket. I love cricket.
Yeah.
Coming from Pakistan, but also being in Australia.
Of course.
So I'm involved in like those kind of things too. But I feel like it's one of those things. You get to decide what kind of career, what kind of life you have, and sometimes obviously there's a lot of expectations, but you can kind of do it in a way that you want to, but don't try and set up everything all at once. Like get something working first, then do the next thing and the next thing, and so on.
Yeah. And as your startup grows, it's important to bring in good people, of course. And I guess you should focus on the stuff that you're really good at and that you like as it grows. And if you bring in really good people in those other areas that can do stuff better than you, because most of us startup founders, we're jack of all trades, master of none, so to speak. We might master a few areas. So bringing in those people, as you grow is really, really important as well. And that frees up more of your time, and you need to be able to delegate and look after your team. And yeah, that's what I found as well. I think that I'm making you would have done that with Catalyser.
100%. And I think that's something that I want to sort of shout from the rooftops, which is really find people better than you that can do the job. Obviously, in the very early days, you might not be able to afford them, but as soon as you can, if bring the people that know what they're doing, or that are kind of specialists in their areas, because you as a founder can get something started, but it's not going to grow from there until you've got the right people in. And if we didn't have those hires and those people in our team who helped us systematize, operationalize a lot of the stuff they were doing, really work out the kinks of the system and help us scale, we wouldn't be able to achieve the impact that we are doing. I think many of us, including me, get in our own way by kind of thinking that we can do everything. We can't. So it's good to have the right kind of people involved. Absolutely, 100%. That's great advice.
Yeah, at the beginning you do have to do everything, but then slowly, Look, something else that I found really problematic and difficult, if you're not from a sales or marketing background, let's say you're like yourself, an engineer, developer, etc., and you have your startup, and you can develop really good stuff. You got your MVP or whatever. How important do you think marketing and sales are? And if you're like a migrant or refugee entrepreneur, what would you? And you haven't got that background. What would you recommend these people do? Because when I interviewed Alan Jones, he said he does T-shirts as a hobby. It's something like, if you are a developer and a startup founder, the most important thing isn't your coding, it's marketing and sales, or the only thing, pretty much. And I found the same. Like, we had an amazing startup, terrible at marketing and sales, and that unfortunately, meant that we didn't go where we wanted to go. So, what are your thoughts on that?
I think this is one of those areas where it's just so crucially important that and a good way to kind of think about it, particularly if you're an engineer, is like we like to think in terms of frameworks or kind of models. And so I personally really like that lean canvas or that lean framework, where you can look at something and you can think about a problem you're solving, solution, whatever, but it's not about you. I think that's really important. We start with technology, particularly if you're an engineer, but it's not about you. It's not about what kind of cool gadget you can build. It's about actually understanding who you're trying to solve the problem for as your customer, and then figuring out, how you can solve their problem, and then figuring out how you can reach them, what's the best way, and so on. So I think there's a bit of a method to the madness. And I feel like sales and marketing is something that can absolutely be learned and should be learned. And I think part of that also is storytelling. So Alan is really, really great at storytelling.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's an amazing skill that you need when you want to do sales and marketing, because no one really likes just being pitched at or kind of sold to. Whereas, like, if you're telling a story, if you bring people on a journey, people are more likely to kind of join you. And so I feel like whether you want to build a great team, want to get funding, want to sell your product or service, you need to be able to have those storytelling and those sales
Yeah.
and marketing skills. But it is one of those things that, I mean, especially if you're not someone from that background, I highly recommend spending some time in and investing in. And if that's something that you absolutely don't want to do, then definitely have someone in your team as a co-founder who is really good at that stuff. Because without that, your business doesn't exist. It's one of those things where like you can build the most amazing product in the world, but if it just sits on the shelf, um, there's no business growth.
Exactly.
So
I,
you've
I,
got to kind of figure out how to
will,
get it out there.
I would also say salespeople are good at selling themselves. So they may sell themselves to you, but make sure you really get the really good ones that are not just talking the talk. Yeah, we had a bit of experience with that as well, unfortunately. Like we did bring one that was okay, and then we were going okay, and then COVID hit. And then after that, we bought another one. They're supposed to be like top guy and everything. And yeah, unfortunately, nothing much going on there, I could say. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point where it's like, I mean, and this is what I'm saying is the difference between like in having someone as a team versus as a co-founder or a founder.
Yeah.
But specifically, I would say for the founding team should be and the founders should be doing the sales and marketing in the early days of the startup, because you need to understand whether you've got the right product, right messaging, right kind of,
Yeah.
I guess, like everything's working, and also understand how to do it. It doesn't have to be great, but at least have like a basic understanding, because when you do hire someone, you're able to kind of manage them and work with them. And so to have that kind of baseline knowledge is really important.
Yeah.
And you're the best kind of, I guess, advocate for your product. And oftentimes engineers and kind of scientists think, well, we don't know anything about sales and marketing. How can we sell it?
Yeah.
And if you are a technical person, oftentimes you will get more trust from your consumer, from your audience, because they know that you have considered all the things and you're not kind of just pitching them, but
Yeah.
actually telling them what it is.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's just one of those things where I know it's out of people's comfort zone sometimes to get it out there, call someone, send them an email, do something around sales and marketing,
Yeah.
but really it can make or break your business, and I highly, highly, highly recommend. This is something that I struggled with when I started as an engineer, but I think
Yeah.
it's one of the things you have to do is to be able
Okay.
to learn how to do it and just do it really well.
I think it's anything you do in life, really, it's helpful. You're really selling yourself. I interviewed Liz Swigart recently, and she was talking about when you're starting a startup, the first few years, just let people know about your story. Be vulnerable. Don't try and be like something that you're not, bigger than you are. And I've heard another podcast with a very successful founder was saying, no, you have to. It was actually talking about B2B sales, which is very difficult, so I was doing that as well. No, you have to appear to be really, bigger than you are, very professional, which goes without saying. You should be professional, but there's sort of two camps there. It's like, okay, you're a startup. We need your help. We need your help to do what we're doing. This is the journey. Join us on the journey. And the other is, oh, look, we're not really a startup. We're a business. We are, pretty successful. Come along and be successful with us, or these other companies are with us, and you should. That sort of, like, what do you think works best?
I think this is one of those things where, like, it's good to really know where you actually stand. So not the kind of projection you want to make, but where you really are.
Yeah.
Are you actually a startup, or are you actually this kind of business that actually does have a lot of clients or does have the kind of standing? And I think knowing that is important, because you don't want to tell yourself that lie. You want to know, where you actually stand yourself, number one.
Yeah.
And I think also understanding your market, and if you're solving an important problem, if I'm sure you know about it, but for the audience as well, you should definitely check out, like this law of diffusion of innovation, this curve where, you've got the early adopters who are the people that really want your product because that's solving a particular problem for you. And so to be able to identify who those are, you want to work with them. And they could be large corporates. They don't have to be like a small business or individual. When you're doing B2B, it just obviously takes longer, but it's understanding who they are, and who has a real need that you're trying to solve. I think they're oftentimes more willing to work with startups. And I've personally found being vulnerable and being honest about who you are and where and what stage you are, I think helps you go a long way in building trust. Because at the end of the day, whether you're selling to an individual consumer or B2B kind of sale, it's always about building trust and relationships because you are
Yeah.
actually working with other people. And like if you are kind of setting that relationship in the wrong kind of way, I personally feel that then it just doesn't go well. It's
Yeah.
better to do it in a way where it's like being
Yeah.
transparent, saying this is yes we've had success, but also we're not like the biggest company yet, but we've got these aspirations. We can work with you, we can
Yeah.
support you, and sometimes larger companies like to work with startups because they want to support them. It makes them look good.
Mhm.
But then also because they can see there's an opportunity to work with them specifically and oftentimes ask them a lot more specific kind of support that a
Yeah.
large company would not provide sometimes because like they would have many different clients. Why would they kind of I guess specifically support you because they don't care as much about one specific client versus like 100 other clients they might have, 1,000
Yeah.
other clients they
Yeah.
might have. So I think there's benefits of being a startup, there's benefits of being small and agile and nimble, and I think it's about telling that story and being really positive about it and saying, look,
Yeah.
yes,
Totally
we're a small
agree.
team, we've got big aspirations, and we can do a lot
Yeah.
more for you and support you.
Yeah, it's good advice. And look, when I started, I thought, no, I had to feel bigger than I am and all that, but it's not really genuine and it doesn't feel good. I think it's a much better path just to be genuine and just say, look, come along on the journey with us. This is what we're trying to do. This is a problem we're trying to solve. We can help you, But I have to say, B2B sales are really hard. It can take 3 months to 18 months, and then things can just fall over right at the end, and it's very difficult. But I mean, I haven't done B2C, but there's a lot more in that space as well. So there's no easy way. I guess that's life, isn't it? There's no easy way to do anything. But the more knowledge you have, and I think the more genuine you are, the more they relate to you as a person as well. I guess the more they'll come on board. So it's really good advice. All right. Well, look, I really appreciate your time today, Usman, and you're doing wonderful work out there, and it's really, really important work. And I hope that we get lots of listeners, in that space, listening to this. And if you know somebody who is trying to get a business started or a startup in the migrant or refugee space, then make sure you share this podcast with them because it's going to be very helpful. And we'll put the links to Catalyser and other projects you're working on in the show notes. And so really appreciate all your time, and thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me as well. It was a real pleasure to talk to you and then kind of work out some of these ideas and also advice for founders. And for anyone who wants to get any support, even if you're not a migrant or refugee entrepreneur, feel free to reach out. I'm very happy to help and support in the community, and at the very least can kind of send you in a particular direction or give you some resources. So very happy to help, even if you're not a refugee or a migrant, but just looking to start your startup here in Australia.
Thanks so much, Usman.